Alright, we've got boundaries now. We're moving on to standard English. Okay, which choice completes the text so that it conforms to the convention of standard English? You're going to see this phrasing a million times on the SAT. It's guaranteed to be on there. These are just some of the things we're also going to get into form, structure, and sense, but this is boundaries. So first thing you need to know is your types of clauses. So you got two types of clauses. You should know this, right? This should be common sense. This should be common knowledge. Independent and dependent clauses. So an independent clause can stand on its own. So something like the man and the dog went to the park. All right, this part here is an independent clause. But this part here, the dependent clause, is where they played catch. If I just said where they played catch, it doesn't make sense. Okay? Like, just think about it in your head. It doesn't make sense. You wouldn't say that, right? So a dependent clause is something that requires some other clause, some independent clause, to kind of qualify it. So it makes sense, right? The where is now answered by to the park. Now we have to link clauses, right? We have to link our dependent and our independent clauses. And how we do that, there's quite a few ways. So the first thing is end punctuation is kind of just like a qualifier for any of this, right? You need to make sure that if you're asking a question, if your sentence asking a question, it's going to end in a question. Or if you're making a statement, it's in a period or an exclamation point, right? If you're making a command or something. Okay, that should just be common sense. You should just, have that all set. Now, coordination is our first way that we use to link independent clauses, and we need to use fanboys. What's fanboys? It's an acronym for and, nor, but, or, yet, or so. Okay. Now, we're going to use this formula here. Okay, and you should memorize these also. Independent clause plus comma plus fanboys plus another independent clause. Okay, this is how you link using the coordination skill. So you have a first independent clause, then you add a comma, a fanboys, and another independent clause. So let's say we have our first here. This is an independent clause, comma. This is one of our fanboys. Then another independent clause. Let's look at subordination. We're going to use to link independent clauses again, but we're going to make a clause dependent by doing a subordinating conjunction. So we have a subordinating conjunction, an independent clause, a comma, and an independent clause. Although it was raining, think about it, on its own it doesn't really make sense because you need to say something else, although what, right? It doesn't make sense. Comma, the sun was still shining, another independent clause. Lastly, we got our semicolons here we're going to use to link independent clauses again. Semicolons are the easiest one. You just have to have an independent clause, then a semicolon, is your space, and then an independent clause. So ice cream was well scented, semicolon, the air smelled like chocolate. Now we have supplements, or otherwise known as elements. Okay. Essential elements are necessary for this sentence to make sense, and they don't require any separating punctuation. A non-essential element is separated from the rest of the sentence by either a comma, or two commas, a pair of dashes, or a pair of parentheses, right? And the sentence still makes sense when a non-essential element is not there. But if a sentence doesn't make sense when something is missing, it means there was an essential element. Now, if you have a non-essential element at the start of a sentence or at the end of a sentence, you just separate that using one punctuation mark. For example, a famous president, comma, Abraham Lincoln, was known for presiding over the United States during the Civil War. If it's in the middle of a sentence, you separate your non-essential element using two punctuation marks. Again, must be a pair of dashes, parentheses, or commas. So I could make this parentheses, I could make this commas. Okay? They're only going to give you one option that's correct. So this also must match this. I cannot have a dash and then like a comma. It just doesn't make sense. So Abraham Lincoln, a famous president, was known for presiding over the United States during the Civil War. Lastly, here's just a brief punctuation guide. Commas can be used to separate lists, to separate elements as we saw earlier, and to link those clauses together. Colons can only come at the end of an independent clause. They can either provide an explanation to something, or they can just, give you a colon and then you have a list after that. So you have a list. Okay, dashes are used to separate non-essential elements as we discussed, and that's pretty much all you'll need to use dashes for on the SAT. And that is some basic grammar stuff.